we have Eridanus from THORChain. He's a senior developer for 9 Realms and a key contributor for THORChain. They're one of the first cross-chain decentralized exchanges and also one of the newest integrations with Edge, I think just a couple weeks ago, that went live in our previous release. So yeah, you can find it there. And yeah, I'll let you have the stage.
Hello. Oh, there we go. Sorry. Don't know how to use mics. Thank you, everyone. Thank you, Edge and BitRefill and the other sponsors for having me. My name is Eridanus. I work for a company called 9 Realms. 9 Realms as a company is one of the kind of core contributors to the THORChain protocol. We do a lot of things like work on the protocol itself, work with security teams, work on infrastructure, things like that. So yeah, I'm here today to talk to you about THORChain, what it is, what it does, how it works, and the unique value that it provides for the entire crypto industry. There are a lot of ways to describe THORChain. The one on the screen I think is kind of the easiest to understand, and that is the native asset cross-chain protocol. Also, feel free to stop me at any point with questions. I'll try to leave some time at the end as well. So there's a lot of cross-chain kind of protocols out there, but for reasons I'll get into, THORChain is very unique, and I think it's the only protocol that can kind of accomplish what it does for the industry. So let's get into it. So more specifically, what does THORChain do, and what is it? THORChain is a sovereign L1 blockchain built on the Cosmos SDK and Tendermint. And it has a built-in AMM, or automated market maker, similar to like Uniswap, with some distinct design differences. And obviously one of them is that it is cross-chain as opposed to being just on Ethereum. So yeah, again, it facilitates cross-chain swaps with native assets. And that's an important distinction for the cross-chain space, because a lot of solutions are kind of follow the more bridge architecture, where you are sending things on a source chain, which gets locked in a smart contract, and then on the target chain, the same amount of tokens are minted. So that in that case, you kind of like the locked tokens and the minting and the wrapped tokens, which THORChain does not do. We don't deal with any of that. A little bit about our security model. So obviously, as a Cosmos-based chain, we are a proof-of-stake network, but we're a little bit different and unique in that we are, I would say, more bonded proof-of-stake. And what that means is that each one of the Thor node validators bonds a minimum of 300,000 Rune tokens, and those Rune token is the native token of THORChain. And since THORChain actually secures external L1 assets in its vaults, the amount of Rune token value must be more than the value of the tokens locked, the external tokens locked. And the reason for that is that it's a slashing mechanism. So in proof-of-stake networks, when a node does something bad, if they make up a transaction or something like this, they will get slashed. And in our case, if a node operator were to steal an external L1 asset that they are securing on their vault, their bonded Rune would get slashed. So it's an economic security model. This is also kind of unique to cross-chain models. I mean, a lot of these cross-chain solutions, they're what I call like reputational security. I mean, they control the validators, they control the vaults, but there's no economic incentive for them to not steal. It's really just like their reputation, right? They wouldn't steal because then their reputation would go down the drain, and they wouldn't want that. So I think that the kind of economic security model is a little bit stronger. Lastly, it is a protocol, not a front-end DApp or a DEX. So it's meant to be built upon. Shout out to Edge. Edge was just one of our latest integration partners. Paul and the team were great to work with. And so they kind of emulate the use case, right? THORChain is meant to be this nameless backend that provides these cross-chain swaps. And it's really kind of in competition with centralized exchanges, in that the only place to swap Bitcoin to Ethereum natively right now, besides a centralized exchange, which you have KYC for, is THORChain. And THORChain does it in a decentralized fashion. You don't have to offer up KYC at the protocol level. And so that's kind of the future that we're working on. Another important thing about THORChain is that it is chain agnostic. So a lot of the bridges out there will either stick to EVM land, so you'll have bridges that you can only swap tokens to and from EVM chains, or just IBC connected chains, or just substrate based chains. THORChain is chain agnostic. Its vision is to support the entire crypto ecosystem, the entire crypto industry. THORChain is not making any bets in terms of what is the ecosystem that's going to win out in the long run. I personally believe that the greatest innovations in crypto have not yet happened, and when those do happen, THORChain will be there. THORChain will be ready to support the ecosystem that needs supporting. The other amazing thing about this is that THORChain really kind of unifies all the DeFi ecosystems out there. Each of these chains or chain ecosystems have their own DeFi, landscapes, right? They have their own DeFi projects, and many of these chains don't have any DeFi ecosystems, such as Bitcoin, Dogecoin, Litecoin. The UTXO chains that don't have smart contracting don't really have a prominent DeFi ecosystem, and THORChain kind of helps bring DeFi to these chains, which is incredible. Okay, so let's dive in a little bit to more specifically how it works. So THORChain's Crosschain AMM has a pretty unique design. The first kind of thing to note is that every liquidity pool, the asset is paired with Rune. So in a traditional AMM like Uniswap, for every trading pair, you need another liquidity pool. And what this kind of leads to is this fragmented liquidity across many shallow liquidity pools to support every trading pair. With Rune as the common settlement asset between every asset, we can have one LP per asset. So Bitcoin you pool once in THORChain, as opposed to across many different liquidity pools. And so this kind of emulates it further. On the left there, you have a bunch of shallow pools, but on the right, with THORChain's design, you have concentrated liquidity. So I think there's about 27 active pools on THORChain right now, but it enables, I think, 378 trading pairs. So in the traditional AMM model, you would need 378 liquidity pools to enable that. So that is kind of capital efficiency right there. Cool. So diving into more like how it works, one of the fundamental innovations of THORChain is this idea of cross-chain consensus. So since THORChain, one other point on the AMM, this kind of brings up one of the design principles of THORChain, which is to not rely on third-party data. It's a self-contained system. So what I mean by that is, since the AMM is built into THORChain, THORChain understands the prices of each of these assets. So the important thing there is that THORChain doesn't need to rely on a third-party price oracle to understand the value of each token. I don't know if any of you saw the Mango Markets kind of hack recently, but that was a perfect example of the dangers of relying on third-party data, because it's a point of vulnerability in your system. If someone can manipulate that point of data, then your system can be exploited. So that is one of kind of the design principles that THORChain abides by. So moving back onto Crosschain Consensus. So each of the validators of THORChain actually runs a full node of every connected chain, which again kind of drives that point home. So every Thor node is running an Ethereum daemon and a Bitcoin daemon and an Atom daemon and an AVAX daemon. So they are pulling that blockchain data directly from their own full nodes, which they can kind of trust as a trusted source. So they're not pulling it from you know, a blockchain provider that could again be kind of exploited. So you know that's another protection there. So essentially, THORChain validators witness transactions on each of these connected blockchains and makes consensus about their consensus. It's a little weird. It's like consensus on the consensus of another chain. And since THORChain, again, is its own L1 blockchain, the validators post messages to that L1 blockchain, and as soon as a supermajority agree that, you know, this transaction did happen, that the business logic is then executed. So we'll give you an example here when we're going to go through an anatomy of a cross-chain swap. In this case, we'll look at ETH to Bitcoin. And it's kind of like at a high level, a three-step process. So a user will broadcast a transaction on Ethereum, and it will contain a memo. And for Ethereum, that memo goes into the hex data field. And that memo is going to kind of identify two things. It's going to identify that the user wants to swap this Ethereum for Bitcoin. It's going to identify the Bitcoin address to send the Bitcoin to. They can also add other things that we can get into later, but they can add like an affiliate fee. So if, for example, Edge Wallet has surfaced this user to THORChain, Edge Wallet can take a affiliate fee on the swap. They can also define a swap to limit. So it's basically like I guess kind of like a limit order across the AMM. So if the amount of Bitcoin swapped out doesn't reach this amount, then cancel and refund the transaction. So the user broadcasts the transaction to Ethereum. One by one, the Thor node validators will witness this transaction and say, yes, this transaction is valid. They are sending it to THORChain, and it's a valid swap memo. Let's go broadcast that to the THORChain blockchain. As soon as that hits supermajority, the swap will be executed. THORChain will pull the pool data, determine how much Bitcoin should be sent out, and will schedule the outbound transaction. So a little bit of a note on signing outbounds. So THORChain has what is called Asgard vaults, and Asgard vaults are actually threshold signature vaults. So they're not multi-sigs, but they are powered by TSS. And what that basically means is that there's 20 validators to an Asgard vault, and one of those vaults will be selected to serve this outbound. So each vault contains Bitcoin and AVAX and Ethereum, all the assets on THORChain. One of the vaults will be chosen to serve that outbound, and those nodes will then go and sign that outbound. As soon as a super majority of nodes do sign, that transaction will be broadcasted to the Bitcoin blockchain. So that is kind of the anatomy of a swap. To take it a step further, so we have this idea of cross-chain DEX aggregation. And this is a relatively recent feature that was released. And the idea here is that we can daisy chain different liquidity pools in order to open up more exotic swapping routes. So for example, if you wanted to swap Tether on Ethereum to Tether on AVAX in a decentralized way, you could do it through this feature. And I believe that's the only place you can do that right now. So what happens is that the first swap from Tether to Ethereum is done on Uniswap or SushiSwap. The second swap goes through THORChain, which is the ETH to AVAX. And then the third swap goes through Pangolin or Trader Joe and does the AVAX to Tether swap. And so basically the user only needs to sign that first transaction, and then THORChain signs the second transaction of swapping AVAX to Tether. So it's still one transaction for the user, but it basically daisy chains 3 liquidity pools together, which is pretty cool. Okay, let's talk about liquidity. So there are basically 2 ways to provide liquidity onto THORChain. One is still kind of in development. The first and primary way, again, every liquidity pool is it's basically L1 asset paired with Rune. So in order to provide liquidity, you would provide both Bitcoin and Rune into that liquidity pool. So as an LPer, you do earn a swap fee on. So every swap that comes through the Bitcoin pool, you would then earn yield on your liquidity based on how much percentage of the liquidity you do hold. You are able to just provide Bitcoin, but what happens under the hood is that half of that Bitcoin is swapped to Rune. So it's still internally, you still have 50-50. But you can just do this with a Bitcoin address. There is no requirement to actually hold native Rune. Yeah. Yeah, that's a good question. So the question is it deterministic? Is it so? It basically, the idea is that it's based on your ratio of the liquidity in the pool, and basically every block rewards are paid out, and so every block is about 5 seconds, and it's paid out proportional to the amount of liquidity that you own. So if you own 5% of the liquidity of the Bitcoin pool, you're going to get 5% of the rewards. So the liquidity. So the question was, does the validator get all of the rewards, or is it spread out? So the rewards to the liquidity pool is just to the liquidity providers. So that wouldn't necessarily be a validator. Validators don't provide liquidity directly. So this is just me, for example, who I provide liquidity to the Bitcoin pool. So anyone who does that, they receive rewards on a block per block basis, based on their proportion ownership of that pool. Validators also earn block rewards on a block per block basis. And there is a mechanism to determine how much liquidity providers get versus node operators get. And that's called the incentive pendulum. We don't need to get into that right now unless you guys want to. There's a lot of fascinating topics. All right, cool. Moving on here. So this is actually a very exciting feature that's kind of in testing right now. It's called Savers, and it's a way to earn yield on your L1 assets, Bitcoin, Ethereum, AVAX, without price exposure to Rune. And so, obviously not everyone wants price exposure to Rune. And in like a traditional LP, I'm sure some of you have heard of like the idea of impermanent loss, where the value of your tokens may change over time. The depths of the pool might change over time. So you might get less tokens than you originally put in just based on price movements, which is, kind of a dangerous thing. THORChain does have impermanent loss protection. So if you keep your liquidity in for 100 days, you get 100% impermanent loss protection. So you get at least as much as you put in. But this new feature called Savers basically allows you to kind of circumvent that, and you can earn in-kind yield. And the way that it works is it uses this thing called synthetic assets. Very exciting. So a synthetic asset is actually backed 50% by Rune and 50% of asset. It's like kind of a traditional LP position, but it's always 1-to-1 redeemable for the underlying L1 asset. So if you put in 1 Bitcoin into the Savers vault, you basically mint synthetic Bitcoin that is represented by 50% Rune and 50% Bitcoin, yet you can always redeem it for 1 Bitcoin, 1 native Bitcoin. And so what happens over time as the Bitcoin pool earns yield, the savers who put just their L1 native Bitcoin in would earn 50% of the yield of that token, or of that pool, excuse me. So they're not exposed to the price movement of Rune. They're not exposed to the Rune asset, which is a benefit, but they get only 50% of the yield that they normally would, which is obviously, so that's kind of a balance that they need to determine if that's like right for them. And the traditional LPers kind of get a bump because they get basically 50% more like of the yield that the savers would have gotten by that deeper liquidity, which is kind of a nice bonus for them. Yeah.
A single-sided liquidity pool.
Yeah, exactly. It's kind of single. So yeah, we're trying to figure out the right naming. We kind of landed on savers because again, you can provide single-sided by just providing Bitcoin in the traditional fashion. But yes, you're right. It's basically a single-sided yield product, right? So like you have ETH, you want to earn more ETH, you put it into the Savers vault. So yeah.
Thanks. To provide the impermanent loss protection that you do after 100 days, what do you do like behind the hood to make sure that you don't get stuck with the difference?
Yeah, so how that works, the impermanent loss protection is the protocol will basically look at when you last deposited, and when you go to withdraw, it'll calculate the number of days it's been, essentially. And then there's a protocol reserve that I think has like 100 million Rune tokens, and it will pull from the protocol reserve as a liability and basically make your LP position whole based on the value of the tokens when you originally deposited. Cool. All right. Okay, so yeah, so this is kind of, I don't know where I'm at in terms of time, but we're kind of wrapping up here. So 5 minutes. Okay, cool. So yeah, kind of going back to an original point, THORChain is really meant to be built on, the kind of destiny of THORChain is not to have a large brand or a large presence. It's really meant to be this kind of nameless backend that many wallets and dexes and dApps integrates with. So that's kind of where it's going. And some of the benefits about building on THORChain is it's permissionless. Anyone can integrate with THORChain. There's no API keys. There's no signups. If you can broadcast a transaction on the source chain, then you can receive tokens on any destination chain that THORChain supports. It's revenue generating. So again, with the affiliate fee system, wallets and dexes can earn fees on each swap or add liquidity that they bring for their users. Decentralized. We all love that one. There's no intermediary. There's no centralized body that can freeze funds. There's no blacklist. There's no whitelists. That's super important. That's the whole idea of THORChain. Non-KYC, permissionless swaps. Transparent. Everything is open source. There's on-chain settlement. All the vaults are provably solvent. So a lot of times in CeFi and these kind of like centralized finance, but like with a blockchain curiosity companies, it's a black box. You don't know what's happening. You don't know if they're solvent. You don't know where your funds are. That is the complete opposite with THORChain. Everything is on-chain. Just a little stat there. So yeah, revenue generating. So like the dexes that have turned on affiliate fees, they all did it kind of earlier this year. $900,000 were earned by those affiliates this year, which is pretty good, especially since the last kind of bit of this year has been relatively slow in the market. So yeah, here's another screenshot here. So like verifiably solvent. One of the security mechanisms of the network is that our vaults are continuously being pulled for the balance that they have versus what the network thinks they should have. And if that those values are ever kind of at odds, the network will actually automatically halt that chain so that we can kind of look into that issue and figure it out. This is so we can kind of go through an exercise here. Let's put my money where my mouth is and look at one of the vaults. So this is the list of Asgard vaults. Apologies for like just showing you raw JSON. But we're going to get this address of this Asgard vault. We're going to open up the block explorer for AVAX and open that vault. And we're going to see how much AVAX this vault is supposed to have. This is in 8 decimal places, so hold on. All right, so it's supposed to have 6,469 AVAX and 0.53. Let's see how much it's got. 6,469.53. Okay, cool. That would have been bad if that was not the real value. But that's kind of just an exercise. You can see that everything's on chain. Everything is completely transparent. So, your users will know what's going on. There's nothing that can kind of stop the swaps. You know where the liquidity is at. So that's kind of one of the biggest benefits. Okay, and I think that's it. So this on the left is my email address. If anyone wants to take a picture, feel free to reach out. Here's on the right is the THORChain documentation. If you have a crypto project that is looking to provide swaps to your users without having to go through KYC, we are a great option. So yeah, feel free to reach out with any questions or anything.
Going over here.
So this is kind of a two-part question. First part is, and you may have covered this when I was in the bathroom, but are you related to Thor, the currency, at all?
No, we are. So Thor, the currency. I think there's a lot of Thor out there in different places.
There's
Thor,
one big one.
Yeah, so Thor, the currency, I know is the token of THORSwap, which is one of the ecosystem dexes. If it's not that Thor that you're talking about, no.
I don't know much about the big Thor. I just know there's one big Thor, and that's all I know.
Okay,
But my
so-
second question is completely invalidated by the answer to the first.
Okay.
So thank you.
Yeah, you're welcome.
I know you said that you don't blacklist, but what if it's a chain that has blacklisting on it? It's like if you have Tornado Cash and you decide to go through Thor, I mean, you're going to be blocked by the Ethereum blockchain, correct? Or
Yeah, I mean, if Ethereum ever does blacklisting at the protocol level, then we can't really do anything about that. So, we would still service the transaction, and whatever we can service, we will. Again, there's no blacklisting on our side, but for example, if someone swapped from Bitcoin to a blacklisted Ethereum address, we would still service the swap, and we would still, attempt to do it. And if the protocol literally prevented us from sending that outbound, then that there's not much we can do there. But no, there's not going to be anything we can do about that.
yeah, so also one, following that logical conclusion, if you guys got an OFAC issuance, would you comply with it or?
Well, there's no. So basically, like if the SEC or whatever put us on the OFAC list, it would really be up to the individual validators. So that there's like 95 Thor nodes running right now. All of them are anonymous. So it would be up to those validators to figure out whether or not to comply. Hopefully they wouldn't, or hopefully they would get to a jurisdiction where it didn't apply, or who knows what would happen. But it would really be up to them. And the important thing to note there is that all of the key material is backed up on the Thor node. So if, for example, the U.S. government decided to go and shut down some nodes, those nodes could kind of be rebuilt with the same key material and keep the network running. So it would be. Yeah, so we churn every 7 days. So basically every 7 days, new vault addresses are generated and new vaults are kind of funded. So if OFAC, if they went to our vault addresses and said these vaults are on the OFAC list, well, in 7 days there's new vaults, and we're never using those old addresses again. So yeah.
Any other questions?
Just thinking about the price of Rune, I can't figure out what makes it go up and down other than the whole market in general, right? Is that?
Yeah, I mean, in a lot of ways, Rune, the price of Rune is kind of an index on the greater crypto market. When the market does well, it does well. When the market does bad, it does bad. And there actually is a interesting kind of reason for that. There is this idea of a deterministic value of the Rune token. Because since the Rune token is used both as the settlement asset in our liquidity pools and our security mechanism, you can actually calculate the deterministic price of Rune is somewhere between 2 to 3 times the amount of L1 assets it secures. So you can kind of compute the market cap of that and then derive the price from the circulating supply. And so if the value of the L1 assets in the liquidity pools increases, then the deterministic price of Rune is also going to increase. Obviously, there's a kind of a speculative multiplier on top of that. It tends to be, a good amount above the deterministic value. But yeah, that's a good point. It's basically like an index fund.
That was actually my question too.
No, cool.
All right. Any other questions?
Sorry, one more now. Yeah, so you said there's 27 pools, and then you guys support 27 coins, I guess, or so does each pool of Rune have a different value then?
So that's a good question. So the network knows the price of Rune by using the median value of each stablecoin pool in THORChain. If that makes sense. So there's, I think, 4 stablecoins on THORChain: USDC, USDT, DAI, and BUSD. And so it basically takes the median value of that pool as the price of Rune, and then that price of Rune derives every other price. Yeah.
All right, one more question. I'll be right there.
Is the number of validators static at 95, or does that fluctuate up and down? It could be 500 or 20.
Yeah, so it fluctuates every week. Basically, nodes can choose to leave. Nodes sometimes get churned out for bad behavior, which usually means like some of their part of their infra was down, not that they were stealing. Although we would kick them out for that too. Yeah, so it does fluctuate every week. There probably is a upper limit, which is probably defined by Tendermint, because that's the underlying consensus layer. I think right now we have our like soft cap in the code set at like 120, something like that. But it could probably get up to like 250, depending on what Tendermint can handle. Yeah.
All right, let's give it up for Eridanus.
Thank you.